It's a situation we have all feared. You keep calling your loved one, but they don't answer. You try to convince yourself it's nothing. And when they finally do call you back, it's almost this feeling of you can breathe again. But sometimes the silence leads to every parent's worst nightmare. That nightmare became a reality for a mother in Iberville Parish just weeks before Christmas. Her 18-year-old son was not answering his phone, a behavior that was completely unlike him. Deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong. A week later, her fears were confirmed. Her son's body was discovered in a sugarcane field. The investigation revealed a horrifying truth. He had been shot and then burned so severely that the coroner actually had to use dental records to identify him. And investigators believe it was all over a dispute about a cell phone. In this episode, we will take you through the heartbreaking details of the case, the investigation, and our conversations with a grieving mother simply trying to rebuild a life without her son. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are joined by our executive producer, Daniel Brown. Daniel, I think unfortunately we get so many cases where it's a missing child. And in this case, I feel like our standard as media has now become we have to determine if there was any foul play.
Yeah, it's always complicated because it's always someone's child. It's always someone's loved one, someone's family member. So I always try to put myself on the other side of it. If it was, my child or my sibling missing, no matter their age, you want all the help you can get to kind of find them, right? But when you're talking about someone who's 18 years old, it's complicated because 18-year-olds sometimes disappear for a few days and there's nothing malicious about it. There's nothing, no foul play involved, right? So we interact with these cases all the time. And I'll be quite honest, Kiran, and I'll be transparent here. A lot of times you become jaded because you get so many of these sometimes because, the first thought is to reach out to the media for help to find your loved one when they are missing. You can't reach them. And 95% of the time there's always a happy ending. They're reunited and they just went away for a few days. But then you have cases like this where sometimes you don't, and it's a gut check into how you process these sometimes.
Absolutely. And I'll even add to that, Daniel, that a lot of the times law enforcement is who sends us this information
Yep.
saying missing person. And then within a few hours, it's, oh, they've been found. So that's why I feel as media, we also have the responsibility of not constantly putting out missing child, missing, 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 because they simply left the house. They're a runaway. Or they're old enough, like you said, at 18, that they have the right to walk out of their own home but
Correct.
come back. So in this case, this is in Iberville Parish. And Daniel, I guess first, let's kind of set the scene for people who may not be from our area, that Iberville Parish and West Baton Rouge Parish. I guess in your opinion, describe these parishes to me if I know nothing about them.
They're very similar parishes. They're very rural. They're just outside of Baton Rouge. They are kind of, especially Iberville, nestled between the Mississippi River and the Atchafalaya. So it's a lot of marshes, a lot of swamps, a lot of waterways in this area. But when you think about the makeup of these two areas, Kiran, they're very similar, right? Very similar type of people, very similar values, very similar communities. They're neighboring. They share a lot of similarities in that aspect of things.
Absolutely, and very heavily farmland, should I say, sugarcane
A lot of
fields,
farmland, yeah.
lots. And the other reason they're so connected to each other is in order to get to Iberville Parish, you actually have to drive through West Baton Rouge Parish. So these two parishes, the people in these two parishes really come together. Anytime there's tragedy or good news, they really come together for each other. And in this specific case, the investigation spanned both parishes. So 18-year-old Jamarius Mitchell, he goes missing on December the 12th. His
Hmm.
mom actually ended up a few days later telling us that I know for a fact I saw him leaving out with two friends. So it's Plaquemine Police Department that is leading the investigation into a missing child. It's about a few days later, so maybe the 14th, 15th, that we're starting to get, hey, there's an 18-year-old who's missing. We're in conversations with the police department that do you suspect foul play?
Hmm.
The problem is, I think the Plaquemine Police Department, Daniel, was also trying to figure out, is there a foul play? Because they didn't know. So when they don't know, how do they tell us? So at this point is when we start talking to the mother, and she kind of starts filling in the holes for us. And in fact, let me make sure, but I think, Daniel, our first story that we even were able to put out was that I think December the 17th, that
Hmm.
I think we have a legit missing child, or a missing case, missing person case, should I say.
Yeah, 18 years old, like we talked about, it's always it's a gray area there. Even a 17-year-old sometimes a gray area. I think what compounded this too, Kieran, is it's right around Christmas. So you have the family desperately trying to find their loved one, mother trying to find her son just days before Christmas. So this is right around the holidays. And like you said, not only is the media kind of always trying to snuff these things out, but police are always trying to figure that out, right? Like they don't want to just put a missing persons case out without the most information that they can. Because the more information they can put out, the more likely there is to be a positive outcome into this, right? So they're trying to get as much information, but you still put yourself in the shoes of a grieving mother. Like she just wants the picture out, she wants the information out, she wants anyone who's around this area to be on the lookout for her son. So your heart goes out to her, but these cases come up all the time, so you have to kind of do your diligence here. And I think this was all just compounded because it was right around the holidays too. And I think that's something, as you're kind of hearing the details of this case, to kind of keep in mind here.
Absolutely. And in fact, I'll even add this, that it was the conversation with his mother that made us finally say, okay, I think this one's a little different. She told
Yeah.
us that her son he's never run away. This was a mother and son who were very, very, very close to each other. They called all day, they texted each other all day. And then, as I said earlier, she's the one who told us that, hey, he left out on December the 12th with two of his friends. And I want to read this quote. She said, we talk every day and text all day, and Thursday it all just stopped. So
Yeah.
Thursday happened to be December the 12th. And so she literally is begging at this point. And there's some information here that now it's been 5 days. She hasn't heard from her son. She sends us a few photos, one without glasses, one with glasses, because she didn't know what he was he where he would be and which one he would
Yeah.
be with or without. So, Daniel, we I think put out this story at this point that we have a missing 18-year-old. And again, this is where Iberville and West Baton Rouge really come together. Everybody is trying to figure out, where is he? Where is he? Where
I
is
think
he?
And I think too, Kieran, is important. Like, there's a few things at play here. One, like a mother's instinct. Like we always say, like you got to trust the mother's instinct here. A lot of the times, the moms, when they are trying to get information out about their child when they're around this age, they don't have the details that she had. Like, right, she knew who her son was with. She had some details
Yeah,
that were pretty critical, especially talking to him as much as she did. So there were some red flags that you don't hear all the time in cases like this.
absolutely. So we put out, hey, there is a missing 18-year-old. Jamarius Mitchell is missing. We put out his photo. We put out some of the basics. Unfortunately, and now you have to understand that this is around the holidays. So we also have days off with our staff and whatnot. December the 18th. And I guess we need to just give props here, Daniel, to our coworker out that direction. December the 18th, we get a call around 4:30-ish, and we are told that a body has been found. And within 10 minutes, we're on scene.
Yeah,
Deep
she's the the West Coast, the West Side
She is.
Whisperer is what we'll call her.
Yes,
Yeah.
she is. I mean, within 10 minutes, that woman is on scene. So, this is why we kind of explained what Iberville Parish is and what West Baton Rouge Parish is, because this is Sid Richardson Road. It's a sugarcane field. And some sugarcane farmers happen to notice a body. They call officials, and this is right on the edge of West Baton Rouge Parish. Like, you could probably, the next mile, you're in Iberville Parish. And they notice a body. But Daniel, all of us working in news, you and I have been doing this for so long. It's that intuition of, dear God, what if it's that missing 18-year-old? And
Yeah.
as soon
Yeah.
as, go ahead.
Yeah, it's your gut instinct, right? You talk about the mother's instinct, but you also have a journalist's instinct, and a lot of the times you kind of get a feeling of what it may be, and they didn't just discover a body. I mean, the whole reason they discovered the body was because of a fire, right? And we're talking about sugarcane fields, and for anyone that's not familiar, sometimes, well, not sometimes, all the time, there's burning involved with sugar canes. That's how they kind of clear the crops and get the new crop ready, but this was not that type of fire. So it raised some flags of like, hey, why is there a fire in the sugarcane fields? And it had been during a period of rain, so it wasn't like it was like a dry kind of time for this too. So there were some inconsistencies with why there was a fire here, which made these people kind of go and look a little further into what was happening.
Absolutely. Great point there, because I'll be honest, when I moved to this side of town, I wasn't familiar with how that works, that you're
Hmm.
supposed to burn the fields
Yeah.
for the next crop to come in. So a fire, but then the body. Um, as soon as we get on scene, we get the story out. Of course, everybody is saying, could it be him? Could it be him? It was a few hours later that unofficially we were being told, most likely it is him. It's going to end up being him. And now I can go ahead and say this, Daniel. The reason we were being told that information is the clothes that he was last seen wearing on December the 12th. That is what this body was seen wearing. Remember, his body was so burned that they had to use dental records to identify him. It's the last seen clothes that gave away to officials. We're pretty sure it's going to end up being him. Still, we did a responsible journalism and we waited until that we had confirmation, but by this point the mom had pretty much already confirmed it's going to be her son. And imagine that gut punch. December the 18th, days before Christmas.
Yeah, it's tough when you have a body that's, so badly disformed because of fire, because of decomposition, because of a lot of other factors. You don't want to upset anyone, especially around the holidays. Like, hey, this may be your son, but like you said, those clothes were pretty distinct giveaway. I think investigators were starting to put together the pieces. That this was going to be a sad outcome in this case, this missing persons case. Obviously it took some time to kind of get the dental records back, because that's a whole process in and of itself that we've seen play out number of times, and sometimes that's not even enough when you have a case like this, when a body is so badly burned that sometimes it takes even further investigating to kind of officially correctly identify the body.
Absolutely. And it's one of those, Daniel, that day by day or hour by hour, more and more information gets released. So, what we finally ended up learning was that Jamarius Mitchell was shot twice. And after that, his body was burned. So, he's found on December the 18th. So the next day, Daniel, the West Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office releases three names. These are three people that they're looking for in connection to the body dump, the body shot, just in connection to the entire case. Not even a few days later, two people are arrested. This is going to be Devonte Johnson, he's
Hmm.
23 years old, and Sterling Powell, 18. I just want to stress an 18-year-old, his body has been found. Another 18-year-old has been arrested. A third suspect is also 18 years old. 18?
Yeah.
It's so
And remember,
young.
the mom saw him with two friends, so investigators already had a little bit to go on as far as starting a person of interest or a suspect list here. So investigators were starting to kind of piece together all this. They kind of knew this was the body. They knew what the mom was saying about who her son was last with. So there already is a starting ground. They're not starting from scratch here. So that's why we got these three persons of interest or suspects pretty quickly. And then you talk about their age, Kiran, 18 years old, to be charged with murder like this. I mean, your life is also over at this point, right? Like before it's even really started. And you said this at the top, and I think we're going to talk about this quite a bit. All over a cell phone here, over something
Yes.
so trivial, over something so stupid, that a life is over, killed, and then two other people whose life is over because they're connected to this murder potentially, according to investigators here, all over a cell phone.
That alone, you need to kind of almost just let that sink in, that an argument over
Yeah,
a phone, I'd give you my phone. Really? And then,
right.
like you said, here, take it. Absolutely take it.
Yeah.
But that poor mother who now has to figure out funeral plans for Christmas. I cannot imagine that pain. And now, not only that, every year when Christmas rolls around, that's going to be what she is going to remember. So, all over a
And
cell
Kieran,
phone.
now that they had the names, and they're able to start searches and really kind of piecing this investigation together, and that's what led them to some of the victims' personal belongings, in this case, and even the alleged murder weapon here.
Absolutely. Um, Let me add, Daniel, that both of these people who were first arrested, the 23-year-old Devontae and the 18-year-old, they were kind of considered the assistants. They were not the primary suspect. In fact, they were even charged with principal to second degree murder.
Hmm.
What that charge means is that you basically helped someone who did the killing. And then obstruction of justice, which means that you basically kind of, in this case, maybe
Covered it up.
took the body to the cane field. So both of these guys were not the primary suspects. The hunt was on for an 18-year-old, Tyler Davis. He was considered the primary suspect. And Daniel, I want to spend a second talking about this, that we've already said
Yeah.
how close knit West Baton Rouge and Iberville parishes are to each other. And this one hit home for a lot of people, including our own coworker. He was in her house because their own kids have grown up with him. They've gone to school with him. This was a child, and it was just hard for so many people to fathom that, wait, he did what? And wait, our
Capable
kids
of
have
what?
grown
Yeah.
up together. So this was a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. And then this is unique in the sense of that when a person is grieving in Iberville Parish, it's safe
Hmm.
to say both parishes are grieving.
Yeah, because of that closeness, that tight knit community you talk about. They all know each other either from the grocery store or a church or wherever it may be, school.
Yep. So the West Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office is searching for Tyler Davis. This is a nonstop search, Daniel. December, I think the 19th is when they said, hey, these are the people we're looking for. And every day it is, if you hear something happen in West Baton Rouge Parish, you immediately assume, okay, it's Tyler Davis. They have him. Something's going on. Something's happening. So December the 23rd, we get wind that a body is found. Another body is found also in a sugarcane field. Now, this time it's on the other end of West Baton Rouge Parish in Irwinville. And I feel like I need to add this in. Our amazing coworker in West Baton Rouge Parish, both times that bodies were found, she was off. And despite me saying you're off, don't work, nope. She called and said, I'm headed to the cane field in Irwinville. And I think a lot of people, same thing. We go back to that gut feeling. There were a lot of people, including officials, who have now said, yeah, we thought the same thing. They thought maybe it's going to be Tyler Davis. Maybe he
Yeah.
said, hey, I messed up and realized it and ended up doing something or ended up killed. And we have a body found inside of a car in a sugarcane field.
And I'll say this too, like a body in a sugarcane field being found is not completely unusual for this area, but the proximity to each other, that's something that is unusual here. You talk about the documentary Killing Fields, and how bodies were kind of dumped in sugarcane fields and marshes and these type of areas. It's because they're isolated, right? There's not a lot of cameras in these areas. It's easy to kind of, in a criminal's mind anyway, kind of dispose of the body. But so that part's not that unusual. We've seen that time and time again in both West Baton Rouge and both Iberville and other areas in around there. But to have the proximity back to back like this, almost back to back, that part's really unusual. That's something that you don't see all the time.
And 5 days apart. Two bodies found in sugarcane fields 5 days apart. In fact, I remember some of the comments even saying, do we have a serial killer in West Baton Rouge Parish? It does create
Yeah.
this fear. And I'll even add this, that in news, respectfully, you try not to cover a suicide. In this case, it ended up being a woman who committed suicide, and her body was found a few days later in the car. We did feel it necessary to update that because there was this fear in West Baton Rouge
Yep.
Parish of, wait, something's wrong. We have two dead bodies showing up in fields 5 days
Correct.
apart. But in this case, I think the right thing to do was update that this was a suicide.
Yeah, it's the greater good, right? Like, we usually don't report suicides because it's just respect. But in this case, because of the hype around the investigation, the hype around the story, like, I think that was a responsible thing to do.
So we go back to that's December 23rd. A lot of people by the Christmas Eve, you're kind of starting to check out. Your focus is now last minute Christmas shopping, things like that. Every day, I remember we were checking in with the West Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office, checking in with all of our sources. Has anything happened? Any luck with finding Tyler Davis? This is what going on January the 3rd. So 10 days later, something roughly
Mhm.
like that, a week and a half later, that is when they finally find Tyler Davis. He is found in a home in North Baton Rouge. So now we're in East Baton Rouge Parish and they arrest him. They have him. He is charged with second-degree murder.
Yeah, it's definitely a conclusion for the family to know that the man suspected of killing your child in custody and can't hurt anyone. But you're still in the grieving process here, and still in the early stages of the investigation as well.
Absolutely. So Daniel, let's kind of shift gears now. We have all three people arrested. The mother of Jamarius Mitchell has official notification that yes, this was absolutely her son. So she has kind of shifted into now, number one, coming to terms with a very harsh reality, but number two, starting funeral arrangements. Meanwhile, the West Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office, they have all three of their suspects. So now we can kind of shift into the investigation. This is when the West Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office starts releasing more information out there.
Hmm.
And let me back up. I think to explain how law enforcement works, one of the main reasons they kind of don't want to release everything in the beginning is because they are still looking for all three people that they were trying to arrest.
And you're also weighing what is going to help the investigation versus what's going to hurt the investigation. So you always keep something close to your vest, if you will, and you kind of not disclose everything. And I got a little ahead of myself earlier, but I mentioned that backpack that was found. That's all part of this that kind of came out a little bit later. And help really piece together more of what happened and how it happened here in this case.
Yep. So let's get to that. The sheriff's office tells us that on the next day, December the 19th, they ended up going and looking at a home in Port Allen. And inside that house, they find a backpack. That backpack happened to belong
Mhm.
to Tyler Davis. Remember, he's the primary suspect in this case.
And inside that backpack, they found what they believe is the murder weapon here. It was an assault style rifle here that matched the forensics from the body that was found. So you're able to kind of put together, okay, we now have this bag. We know who this bag belonged to, and inside of that bag is the alleged murder weapon here in this case. So it's a pretty big piece of evidence that was kind of discovered early on before we kind of knew about it, publicly anyway, that they kind of had this information. So it really helped solidify who they were looking for in all that information here.
And Daniel, we see this often on TV shows, but it's very
Mm-hmm.
important to point out that how this works, that shell casings that are found on the scene or the actual bullet during the autopsy, if it is still lodged in the body, they're able to pull that and find out, hey, this is an AR-15. And then, kind of like you said, to find that murder weapon, this is gold for when the case goes to trial, to be able to
Yeah.
prove, well, look, we found that AR-15 right here, and the autopsy showed he was shot with an AR-15.
Yeah, it's kind of it's hard to hide behind the forensics here, right? So usually when you have uh, evidence like this, it's usually a slam dunk case. Like it very rarely turns out to not to be. And in this kind of case, it's still looking like it's a pretty solid piece of evidence here.
I just, Daniel, I want to get into the mind of Tyler Davis, that over a cell phone, like what could be the argument over phone? You owe me a phone. You took my phone. You broke my
I know.
phone. I don't get it.
I don't get it either. We still don't really know the why. Like we know it was the investigator said it was over a cell phone, but going further than that, they haven't really said. And like you, Kieran, I keep kind of racking my brain over that. Like, what would make me want to snap and murder someone over a cell phone? Like, I you know, it's hard to kind of come up with a situation or a circumstance where you're like, oh yeah, I can kind of see that. Like I just can't come up with it. Like, like
No,
nothing makes sense here, about the
no.
why you make you go to such extremes here. I think it's the extreme that's hard to fathom and hard to kind of wrap your head around.
Yes. And I, again, I'm lost for words, but agreed with everything you just said, that it's really hard to understand that a phone is worth taking a
Yeah.
life. But you didn't just take a life. You will most likely now spend several decades of your own life behind bars. It is second degree murder. So you can't say it's going to be life behind bars for the rest of your life, because that's first degree. Let me go back just a little
Agree
bit
now,
to
but that
add a
could
little.
always change too, because sometimes that changes in these
That's
cases
true.
as the investigation continues. So, that also could be something that changes. But hopefully, we eventually find out one day, either through a confession or more evidence, what caused that. Because, I think it's hard for a lot of people to kind of, wrap their head and understand anything related to why.
Agreed. Let's go back, Daniel, to the two people, though, who were arrested. These were the very, very first two people. So, what the reason they were picked up for obstruction of justice and principal to second degree murder, Tyler Davis is accused of shooting Jamarius Mitchell twice from the back. It just
Yeah.
adds to the arguments over a phone. So then you shoot him in the back. Shot twice, but then after that, this is where the trio is accused of dragging his body into a sugarcane field. But they didn't set that body on fire immediately. That came a good few days later.
Yeah, it's another part of the mysteries in this case. You dump the body in the cane field, and then you go back a few days later to kind of set it on fire. Like, why? Like, what made you go back and do that? Like, were you worried about the body being found, or did you want the body to be found? Is that why you set the fire? I mean, were you trying to cover up that it was a shooting, thinking that if it was a fire, you wouldn't be able to tell that? Obviously, with forensics and where we are technology wise when it comes to these investigations, it's kind of hard to kind of understand that rationale there. But you wonder why you go back and do that, because that part also doesn't make sense here.
And this is where I guess my brain functions, in a sense of, I want to get inside of your brain and I need the why you did this. But Daniel, those are answers we're likely never going to get, not just in this case, in so many cases. When you are talking about heinous crimes, you're never going to know the why unless someone confesses.
Correct. Yeah. And that's what you hope for in a case like this. You have a lot of the evidence stacked against the suspect here, so you hope maybe there is cooperation and working with investigators to understand, because you have to imagine too that the mom wants answers to these questions too. I think there's never going to be a way to fully understand it, but you have to think that this is your loved one. You want to know the why here. You want to know some of the intricacies about how this all unfolded and happened. You have to.
And speaking of the mother, throughout this entire process, we kept in contact with her. And I remember her just saying, please, Tyler, just turn yourself in, because she needed to know that she could start moving towards closure. I'll always say that I don't think a family will ever get closure. You might get justice, but closure, it's like there was a case we covered, Daniel. In fact, we did a whole documentary on it, and hit her dad, the Lorette case. Her dad
Yeah.
told me, and those words have stuck with me. He said, closure is me closing that book and putting it on a
Yeah.
bookshelf,
Exactly.
and I'm done with it. And he goes, you never close the book. And ever since he
Yep.
said that, those words have stuck with me. So the mother at this point is begging. She is trying so hard, doing everything that she can, that Tyler needs to be caught. I remember we spoke to her right afterwards, and she was just so thankful that law enforcement finally has this guy, that she can now just start coming to terms with this whole reality.
Help me remember this part, Karen, because I don't fully remember. Was this one of the friends that she knew her son was with? Did she know him?
I believe so, because the interesting part is that there were three people arrested, but she said that that night there were two people
Hmm.
she last saw her son leave out with. Now, I don't know if Tyler was with them that actual night on December the
Okay.
12th. I
Yeah.
would assume that because they're charged with principal, that they are the original two who were arrested first. They're the ones who were accused of kind of
Okay.
luring him out of the house and saying, come on, man, let's go have fun. Let's go enjoy our night. And I think that maybe it was all in cahoots. Again, all this information is being very or kept very close to the vest right now, because the deputies want to ensure that the case is solid when it goes to the prosecutor's office to trial. So a lot of that information doesn't come out until trial.
Yeah, I couldn't remember. I remember the two people, and I remember her talking about wanting to turn himself in. I couldn't remember that if she knew him or the connection there. So that's something interesting there.
Absolutely. Let me add to this that in talking to the mom, she is very thankful that all three people have been arrested. But going right back to our little West Baton Rouge whisperer right there, few nights later, she happens to see that the mother is struggling with trying to make ends meet on the funeral. And she sends it to me. And I remember, I think it was like 9, 10 o'clock at night. I updated our article and I posted it. Daniel, this is the part where it's like, I love what we do. Within
This is a
an
good part of the
hour,
job. Yeah.
yes, within an hour, she had enough people stepping up and saying, hey, we're going to cover the cost. And I think it was $1,800. That's not a small amount. You had people in West Baton Rouge and Iberville Parish just start loading up on the GoFundMe. But I mean, in 15 minutes of me posting, I had a nonprofit reach out and say, we want to help. I can't get in touch with her. Somebody else came up, and I remember
Yeah.
my coworker asking, saying, do you even know who this person is? I said, I have no clue. Complete strangers coming together. And Daniel, within an hour, in fact, the next morning, should I say. So in an hour, they're already telling us by the next morning, $1,800 was covered.
Yeah, that's the power of what you do, is the power of your reach, is the power of what this podcast can even do. And even if that amount is a lot for a lot of people, but for some people it's nothing, right? And they have the means to be able to help. And for that mom to be able to receive that help and to take that burden off of her, because she's got so much other burden, but to take that burden off of her is just a remarkable thing. And it's one of the great things about South Louisiana, that no matter what the circumstances, no matter what happened, people rally together and they really find ways to kind of really come together and help each other. And this is a case that really speaks to that community we talk about.
I get goosebumps just thinking that, because that absolutely is the case. I mean, it's not just in this case, it's hurricanes, it's any
Yeah.
tragedy. These two parishes are very close knit, but I have to agree, it's all of Louisiana that we all come together. Daniel, let me add this, that earlier this week, I actually did end up talking to the district attorney who will be prosecuting this case. His office and him, they will be prosecuting this case. And I want to quote, he told me that, quote, I'm going to throw the book at them. Tony Clayton does not put up with crime. He, especially when it comes to teenagers, he has just had it. He has repeatedly said kids are out of control at this time, and he is not going to put up with it. But he told me, quote, I plan to throw the book at them. And right now, yes, Tyler Davis is charged with second-degree murder, but you brought up a very valid point. That's the beginning of this investigation.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of times charges change, especially as the investigation continues. Tony Clayton is someone who is tough on crime. You mentioned being with kids. He's been very vocal on that. He's also someone who does not mince words. He is not bashful about being very blunt in his thinking. You have a lot of people on Facebook that whenever there's something that happens in other jurisdictions saying, oh, if Tony Clayton was on that case, they wouldn't be this outcome, right? So he does have a reputation for being tough on crime and no matter the age or anything. So I think that's pretty telling. And his words don't surprise me one bit. Like I said, he does not mince words.
Does not. And I mean, this case is not even a month old, so we're going to continue to keep you guys updated. If you're not following us already, make sure you follow us on Unfiltered with Kiran. Download our app because we're constantly pushing out updates. So we will be following this case as it starts to kind of move through the court system now and what happens next. But Daniel, while we have our audience here, last week we discussed the New Orleans terrorist attack. And in fact, just earlier this week, the FBI put out a lot more details. And I think one of the most telling parts of their press release was that the number of injured, it started at 35 people. That number has now jumped to 57 people who were physically harmed.
Yeah, 57 physically harmed. We have the 14 that were killed, the 57 physically harmed, and 136 people who were affected by this in some way, whether they were in the area or something like that. So the numbers kind of rose, but that's not even the most damning thing that kind of came out. The FBI, they've been obviously working around the clock, really digging into the suspects, social media postings, what's on his computer, anything electronic kind of thing. And they were able to kind of piece together a little bit more. And I'm going to read a little bit to make sure I get this right. But they were able to find out kind of when he started to become radicalized here. They were able to kind of pinpoint that. It started in 2022. So, 2-3 years ago is when he became more devout in his Muslim faith. Obviously, being Muslim does not make you radical, but that was the start of this. And it was around that time that he began to isolate himself. So he was becoming more devout in his faith, started to isolate himself. By the spring of 2024 is whenever he started to adopt some of those extremist views. And we know from previous releases here by the FBI that he had traveled to Egypt and really kind of started to really embrace some of these radical views. And they're able to kind of piece together more of a timeline. On top of that, what I thought was the most interesting thing to kind of come up of this was really how he was plotting this,
Yes.
in some of his, we talked last week, Kieran, about his decision makings, like why this date, why New Orleans, all those things. They're starting to piece some of that together here. So looking at his online activity, what he's searching, all those things, he was searching about how to access a balcony on Bourbon Street, like what goes into it. They didn't go into specifics, but you got to imagine, like, he was wondering, do you have to have a hotel room or do businesses have, bars have balconies, that type of thing. You have to wonder, like, what those searches. But we know that he was looking into how to access a balcony on Bourbon Street. He was looking for information about Mardi Gras. When was Mardi Gras? All those type of things. And he was even looking at details about shootings in New Orleans, that happened even just days before. So you almost wonder, in what came to my mind, Kieran. This is me talking, not the FBI, but going back to him and his trips to New Orleans prior. And there was another one that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. But the last time where he was wearing those meta glasses, those glasses that
Yes.
record, he was scope, and we talked about, right? He was scoping. He was looking for the soft security areas, and those type of things. So you have to wonder, by him looking up these shootings, he was also trying to get into the mind of police about how they secure areas, how they investigate, where's their mind thinking, like where are some of the soft areas. So he was really putting together a plan here. And what really punched my gut was he really was also researching another attack, a very similar attack. And you wonder if this is what motivated him to do this type of attack on Bourbon Street. But, and we talked about a little bit about last week, but just 10 days before this attack, there was a very similar attack around the world in Germany. It was at a Christmas market
Yep.
there, and someone took an SUV and drove through this Christmas market here in Germany. And 5 people were killed in that attack. 200 people were injured. And this was also just like a 3-minute attack. So almost similar time, a little bit even more than what he was able to succeed on Bourbon Street. But he would really research this and what went into that. So they're able to kind of really start piecing together a lot of these searches and really described his motivation when he was radicalized. And I mentioned that other picture. So we've gotten some different pictures of his time in New Orleans, and he made some trips before the attack to New Orleans. They released another one that just came out November 10th. He visited New Orleans by train. So he boarded a train in Houston. He took a train to New Orleans. And while he was
And
here,
then,
he's go ahead.
no, no, go ahead.
And
I was
and
just
while
going to
he was
say it was
here,
odd that he took. I'm sorry. I was just going to add that what I thought was interesting is he took the train to New Orleans, but then took the bus back home to Houston.
yeah, so you wonder, did he miss the train that day, and there was a bus? Like, we don't know. We don't know why he didn't drive. They didn't release that, but they did release another photo of him walking around New Orleans, and this time he's wearing a backpack walking through the French Quarter. And during that trip, he was looking for apartments to rent on Orleans Street, which was a street that is kind of became part of this investigation, and where he was staying previously. Remember that the apartment, what was the street the apartment was on that he set on fire, whenever he was in town for the
Mandeville.
attack as well. Mandeville. So
Mandeville
Orleans
Street
is
in the St. Rock area.
yeah, in Orleans is in the French Quarter. So he's looking for an
Yep.
apartment to rent. He applied to rent this apartment on Orleans Street, and then told the landlord a few days later that he changed his mind. But we're just starting to get new details and more information about the attack, and what led up to it, and his motivations, and those radical extreme views that he had kind of adopted here.
And to our listeners, I will definitely recommend go back and listen to the podcast we did last week if you did miss that one. So, in that one, at that time, the feds had a lot more information in his visit in October 2024. At that time, we were told, yes, there was a second visit in November 2024, but they didn't have too many details. Now,
Yeah,
everything that Daniel has just told you, all of that came out of that November 24th, I'm sorry, November 10th, 2024 visit.
mm-hmm.
So it's one of those that the FBI, yes, they have nonstop tips coming in. So they're slowly but surely gluing all this together. But it's hard, Daniel, in this case that you can't go to him and ask, why did you do this? You can't
Yeah,
ask anything because he was killed after exchanging gunfire with New Orleans police officer.
correct.
In fact, those officers were also honored earlier this week for their bravery, that had they not started shooting at him, who knows what could have happened. Remember, there were three IEDs also found,
Yeah,
one in the car, and then one was on Orleans and Bourbon, right where he was looking to rent. So who knows what could have happened. It's thanks to those officers that they were able to take this attack down
yeah.
immediately. And
And
then
you're absolutely right, and I'm glad they were honored, because you mentioned those IEDs. They were, the FBI's words. I mean, they were ready to blow. Like, they were ready.
yes.
Like, they were active. He knew what he was doing in that aspect for the most part. So it's a miracle that he wasn't able to trigger those devices, because it would have been a lot worse than what we had. And it was already a pretty terrible situation.
It really was. And then let me add that from everything that you just described and the FBI has released, In my thought, again, this is Kieran's brain kind of piecing it together, the journalism brain in mind of mine saying in his head he was trying to think mass destruction. So yes, when he is googling or he's searching Mardi Gras, how to get on a balcony, he's trying to think of Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras in New Orleans. I mean, Daniel, you and I have both been there several times on Mardi Gras Day. I've
Hmm.
covered it as well.
Yeah, me
It's
too.
so intense that we literally either you hold hands, or I have, in fact, I've done this to a lot of our photographers. I would hold loop in on their belt buckle and I would
Yeah,
hold on to them that way so I don't get separated. Like that's how intense the crowds are. God forbid something like this were to go down. It's almost like that's where he was going until Germany happened. And then it's like
yeah,
when Germany happened, he changed his thought
that's
process and
exactly
said,
right.
wait, that's how I feel.
That's exactly what I thought too. FBI is not saying this. This is me and you saying it. But when I read that he was searching about Bourbon Street, searching about the balcony, searching about, Mardi Gras and other crimes, and then when that attack in Germany happened, things start changing, and you have to wonder if that's what motivated this, if it's a copycat or not. We don't know, but it's one thing if you've never been to New Orleans on Mardi Gras. There's not a lot of parades on Mardi Gras Day. There's some in the morning, but then everyone ends up on Bourbon Street.
Yep.
That's where the crowds. That's where everyone ends up, right? That's where the parades kind of end, if you will, unofficially end, is on Burma Street until midnight, where they clear the streets ceremonially, kind of clear the streets. So it could have been, a different kind of attack here. We don't know, but piecing together all these, online activities and it's very troubling, kind of what's coming out here about the suspect.
Yep. So just to recap, we had 14 people who died, and I say 14. He doesn't deserve to be in that number. If you want to include him, it's 15. So 14 people dead plus the suspect. Now it's 57 people who were injured and 136 people. Well, Daniel, explain that to me. The 136, that's just in general, like businesses, everybody? That I was a little
Yeah, they didn't
confused by
go in.
those two numbers.
I was a little confused as well. We're waiting for the FBI to clarify that. They just said 136 individuals affected by the tragedy, including two businesses. So they didn't go into a ton of detail into that, but the 57 physically injured is a little higher than what the number was prior, and that 136 is definitely an eye grabbing number, but they haven't gone into a ton of details about what that number means, just that they were affected by it.
Yeah. Well, we're going to again keep you updated not only on this, on all the cases we cover. This is our weekly podcast, but we do daily news as well. If you're not familiar with that, it's Unfiltered with Kieran. Go download the app. We have a website. We're on all social media platforms. And if you like our podcast, please tell your friends, your family, leave us reviews, and we are continuing to follow everything for you. We're going to go ahead and leave you for this episode. Daniel, as always, we thank you for joining us. And to all our listeners, thank you for listening. And we will see you next week on next week's episode of Louisiana Unfiltered.